What would you do if the same people who laughed at your unemployment invited you to their mansion party, just to humiliate you? And what if, at the peak of their celebration, the biggest client of your career walked in looking for you? Tonight's story isn't just about revenge. It's about silence. It's about patience. It's about building something so powerful that one day the room that mocked you falls completely quiet when your name is called. This is Rose's story. And trust me, you won't see the ending coming. The first snow of December fell over New York City like quiet judgment. Rose stood on the corner of 7th Avenue and 42nd Street, just outside a glowing glass building in Midtown Manhattan. Yellow cabs hissed through slush. Steam rose from subway grates. The skyline glittered like it didn't care who was winning and who was losing. Inside that building, her former colleagues were celebrating. And Rose was not invited. At least not officially. But she had been encouraged to stop by. "Come on, Rose," Amanda had said earlier that week, her tone sweet but sharp. "It'll be fun. You've been home a lot lately. Might be good to get out." Home a lot. That was the polite way of saying unemployed. Rose adjusted her wool coat. It wasn't designer. Not like the ones inside. But it was clean, tailored, elegant in its simplicity. She had always believed dignity didn't need a label. 3 months ago, Rose had walked out of Brightline Marketing, a fast-growing Manhattan agency where she had worked for 5 years. Walked out. Not fired. Not laid off. Walked. And no one inside that party understood why. They thought she had cracked under pressure. They thought she couldn't handle competition. They thought she failed. They had no idea. Brightline Marketing was the kind of company that looked like success from the outside. Glass offices, espresso machines, rooftop networking events, influencers coming in and out like rotating doors. But inside, it was political warfare dressed in business casual. Rose had started there at 24, fresh out of NYU. She was sharp, analytical, creative without being reckless. She understood branding the way some people understood music. It had rhythm to her. Her biggest rival? Amanda Clark. Perfect hair. Perfect smile. Perfect networking instincts. Amanda wasn't more talented. She was just louder. And louder wins, until it doesn't. 3 months ago, Rose had landed the pitch of her life, a tech startup looking to launch nationwide. Multi-million-dollar budget. High exposure. She had worked nights in her Brooklyn apartment, whiteboards covered in strategy, sticky notes lining her walls like battle plans. The morning of the internal presentation, she felt ready. Until she walked into the conference room. Amanda was presenting. Rose froze at the back of the room as her own slides. Her structure, her taglines, her entire campaign concept flashed on the screen. Her name was nowhere. After the meeting, Rose confronted her. "You stole my deck." Amanda didn't flinch. "You left it on the shared drive. That doesn't make it yours." Amanda leaned closer. "In this city, Rose, if you don't protect it, it's not yours." The CEO sided with Amanda. Of course he did. Amanda had already secured the client's excitement. That night, Rose didn't cry. She resigned. But here's what no one knew. Rose didn't just resign. She had already been building something. For almost a year. Quietly. At night. Under a different name. While Amanda chased visibility, Rose built value. She launched a boutique strategy consultancy online. Anonymous, discreet, focused on data-driven brand restructuring for mid-sized companies. She didn't use her real name. She didn't post selfies. She let the results speak. Within months, clients started coming in. Texas, California, Chicago, then Florida, and then something bigger. But she kept it secret, even from her so-called friends at Brightline. Especially from Amanda. Rose stepped inside the Midtown penthouse venue. Crystal chandeliers. Champagne towers. A jazz trio playing near the balcony overlooking Times Square. The invitation read, "Celebrating Brightline's biggest year yet." Amanda spotted her first. "Oh my God, Rose. You made it." Several heads turned. There it was. That look. Pity mixed with curiosity. "So," Amanda said loudly, handing her a champagne flute. "What are you doing these days?" The group leaned in. Rose smiled softly. "Consulting." Amanda tilted her head. "Freelance. You could call it that." Amanda laughed. Well, everyone needs hobbies. The group chuckled. Rose's chest tightened, but her face didn't move. Outside, snow kept falling. Inside, humiliation warmed the room. But Rose wasn't here to defend herself. She was here because she had received a message earlier that day. From someone important. Very important. And that someone was flying into New York tonight. Unannounced. Her phone vibrated in her coat pocket. Unknown number. Landing in 20. See you soon. D. Her pulse shifted. She glanced toward the elevator. Amanda was mid-story, recounting her brilliant pitch that saved the company's quarter. Rose took a slow sip of champagne. You okay? A former coworker, Jake whispered. Perfect, she replied. Because she knew something they didn't. The snow outside turned heavier. The elevator doors at the far end of the penthouse dinged, and a tall man in a tailored navy overcoat stepped out. The room didn't recognize him, but Rose did, and when his eyes scanned the party, they stopped on her. He smiled, not casually, not politely, respectfully. Then he walked straight toward her. Amanda noticed. Do you know him? She whispered. Rose didn't answer. The man stopped in front of her. Rose Carter, he said warmly. The room went silent. Yes. He extended his hand. I'm Daniel Hayes, CEO of Verexon Technologies. The champagne glass slipped slightly in Amanda's hand. Verexon, the billion-dollar tech company headquartered in Silicon Valley. The same company Brightline had been trying to pitch for 6 months. Daniel continued, I've been looking forward to finally meeting the strategist behind our national rebrand. Silence exploded across the penthouse. Amanda's face drained of color. Wait, Amanda said carefully. Our firm has been in talks with Verexon. Daniel glanced at her politely. Your firm submitted proposals, but the campaign we selected was developed by Rose. He turned back to Rose. And I don't do business without loyalty. I hear you used to work here. Rose met Amanda's stunned eyes. Used to. Daniel smiled slightly. Good. Because starting next quarter, we'd like to bring your consultancy on as our exclusive partner. Gasps. Phone slowly lowered. The jazz trio stopped mid-note. Amanda swallowed. That's not possible, she muttered. Daniel's voice was calm. Firm. Oh, it's very possible. He looked at Rose again. Shall we discuss terms? Rose set her champagne down. For months, she had stayed silent. For months, they had laughed. Tonight, the room listened. She turned to Amanda, her voice steady. You were right about one thing. Amanda blinked. In this city, if you don't protect it, it's not yours. The elevator doors opened again behind Daniel. But this time, 3 more executives stepped out, and one of them was holding a folder labeled Acquisition Proposal, Brightline Marketing. Rose's breath caught. She hadn't expected that. Daniel followed her gaze. Oh, he said casually. Did I forget to mention? We're also considering acquiring a mid-sized New York agency to consolidate operations. Amanda's glass shattered on the marble floor. And Daniel's next sentence changed everything. We were hoping you might have a recommendation. Cut to black. The snow had stopped, but the silence inside the penthouse was heavier than any winter storm. Broken crystal glittered across the marble floor near Amanda's heels. No one moved. No one breathed too loudly. Even Times Square's neon chaos outside the floor-to-ceiling windows felt muted, like the entire city had leaned in to hear what Rose would say next. Daniel Hayes stood calmly beside her, hands folded in front of his tailored overcoat. Behind him, 3 Verexon executives waited, professional and unreadable. One of them adjusted his glasses and tapped the folder again. Acquisition Proposal, Brightline Marketing. The same company that had erased her name. Now potentially, under her influence. Daniel's voice was even. We were hoping you might have a recommendation. All eyes were on Rose. Amanda's lipstick smile had disappeared. Her confidence, the same confidence that had filled conference rooms, was gone. For the first time in years, Amanda looked small. Rose inhaled slowly. The penthouse smelled like champagne and ego. She didn't rush her answer. Because power, when earned quietly, doesn't need to shout. You want my recommendation? Rose asked Daniel calmly. Yes, he replied. We value strategic alignment. And you understand this market better than anyone we've spoken to. Amanda stepped forward, voice tight. Daniel, with all due respect, Brightline has been pursuing Virexin for months. We've already developed. Daniel raised a hand politely. Not rude. Just final. Yes. You've submitted proposals. The subtle correction landed like a slap. Rose turned slowly, scanning the room. Jake wouldn't meet her eyes. A few others looked ashamed. Some looked terrified. New York had a way of rewarding winners quickly and abandoning losers faster. But tonight, the labels were shifting. Rose spoke carefully. Brightline has talent, she said evenly. Amanda blinked in surprise. But talent without integrity is expensive. The room tightened. Daniel watched her closely. If you're asking whether Brightline could handle a consolidation under Virexin's standards, Rose continued, the answer depends. On what? Daniel asked. Rose's gaze moved directly to Amanda. Leadership. Amanda's jaw stiffened. This is ridiculous. Is it? Rose replied calmly. Amanda stepped closer, lowering her voice. You're enjoying this. Rose's eyes were steady. No, I'm evaluating. That word stung more than revenge ever could. Brooklyn. 3 months ago. Rain hit the fire escape outside Rose's apartment. She sat on her hardwood floor surrounded by printed analytics reports, campaign drafts, and a legal pad filled with calculations. She wasn't crying. She was calculating. If she took 3 of her independent consulting clients and scaled them using performance-based contracts, she could match her Brightline salary in 4 months. If she automated her reporting systems and hired a freelance data analyst out of Austin, Texas, she could double capacity without office overhead. If she stayed invisible, she could grow. But she needed one anchor client, one major brand. Virexin had been on her radar for months. She studied their quarterly earnings, their brand confusion, their scattered messaging across states. Silicon Valley innovation, marketed like a 2009 startup. She saw what they couldn't, and she built the strategy before ever contacting them. When she finally sent the proposal, she didn't use her name. She used the brand she'd quietly built. Carter and Vale Strategic Advisory. No social media presence. No public identity. Just performance data. Daniel Hayes responded personally. Daniel broke the silence. Let's make this simple, he said. Rose, if Virexin were to acquire Brightline, we would want you leading integration strategy. A collective inhale. Amanda's voice shook slightly. That's impossible. She doesn't even have a job. Daniel smiled faintly. She has the most profitable consulting contract we've signed this year. That sentence hit harder than any insult ever had. Rose didn't react. Inside, her pulse was steady. Outside, snow melted against Manhattan's glass towers. Daniel gestured toward the quieter corner near the balcony. Walk with me. Rose followed. Below them, Times Square pulsed with tourists and billboards. Do you want them? Daniel asked directly. Rose folded her arms against the cold glass. Want what? The acquisition. The authority. The correction. She looked down at the city she had once felt swallowed by. You don't acquire companies to correct people, she said quietly. You acquire them to build something stronger. Daniel studied her. That's why I chose you. He stepped closer. Brightline's valuation is struggling. Their internal turnover rate is high. We can get them below market price. But I need someone who understands the internal culture. You want me to take control of the company that erased me? Yes. And you think that's poetic? I think it's efficient. Rose almost smiled. Efficient revenge. New York would appreciate that. But something inside her hesitated. Because this wasn't just business. This was history. And history has sharp edges. Before Rose could answer, the balcony doors opened. Jake stepped outside nervously. Rose, Amanda's asking for you. Tell her I'm busy, Rose replied calmly. Jake shifted. She says she has something you should see. Rose frowned. Daniel noticed. Go, he said. I'll wait. Inside, Amanda stood near the bar with a tablet in her hand. Her confidence was back, but thinner. You think you won? Amanda said quietly as Rose approached. This isn't a game. Amanda turned the tablet toward her. On the screen, an email thread. Subject, internal proposal, Verexon. Date, 4 months ago. Sender, Rose Carter. Recipient, Brightline executive team. Rose's stomach tightened. She had never sent this. Amanda zoomed in. Looks like you pitched Verexon internally before you left, Amanda said softly. Which means technically, that concept belongs to Brightline. The room felt colder. That's forged, Rose said. Amanda tilted her head. Prove it. You accessed my files. You left them on the drive. The same line. Recycled. Weaponized. If Verexon sees this, Amanda continued, it'll look like you built their strategy using proprietary company data. Rose's mind raced. This wasn't panic. This was calculation. Amanda leaned closer. Recommend us, she whispered. Publicly. Back the acquisition. Say Brightline deserves it. And this email disappears. Blackmail. In Manhattan. How original. Rose glanced across the room at Daniel, who was watching quietly. He didn't intervene. He was observing. Testing. Amanda's smile returned. You're good, Rose. But you're still playing checkers. Rose looked back at the tablet. Then at Amanda. Then around the room. And suddenly she smiled. Softly. Because Amanda had just made one mistake. A fatal one. You should have checked the metadata, Rose said calmly. Amanda's smile faltered. What? Rose turned the tablet slightly. The timestamp on this thread? It says 2:14 a.m. Amanda swallowed. You always forget one thing about me, Rose continued. I don't sleep. The room went still. Rose raised her voice just enough for Daniel to hear. Daniel, would you mind asking your CTO to examine the file origin of this email? Amanda's face drained again. Daniel didn't hesitate. Of course. He gestured to one of his executives. The man stepped forward, connecting the tablet to his laptop. Amanda stepped back. The jazz trio quietly packed up. 5 minutes passed. Silence. Then the executive looked up. This email was generated from a local device tonight, he said calmly. Not 4 months ago. Gasps rippled. Amanda froze. Rose didn't blink. Daniel's voice was ice. Forgery during acquisition negotiations is considered fraud. Amanda's composure shattered. You can't prove. We just did, the executive replied. Security approached. Brightline's CEO looked like he might faint. Rose felt something unexpected. Not satisfaction. Relief. Because the truth, when patient, exposes itself. Amanda was escorted toward the elevator. But just before the doors closed, she looked at Rose. This wasn't over. Not yet. Because as the doors slid shut, Amanda said one final sentence. You still don't know who you're really dealing with. The elevator closed. And Daniel turned to Rose slowly. Seems leadership just became available. Rose stared at the closed doors. Something about Amanda's last words unsettled her. Not fear. Instinct. Because Amanda had always been strategic. Desperate people don't bluff. And that meant there was something bigger. Daniel extended his hand again. So, Rose, shall we build an empire? Rose looked at the skyline. At the company. At the future that suddenly looked limitless. Then her phone vibrated again. Unknown number. Different from before. Message. Congratulations. Phase 1 complete. Her blood ran cold. Hey, Amanda was in the elevator. Then who? Rose slowly looked up. Across the room, standing near the bar, watching her, a man she didn't recognize, smiling. The music had stopped, but the silence felt louder than the jazz ever had. New York's skyline shimmered behind the glass walls of the penthouse, Manhattan glowing gold against the black winter sky. Snow clung to rooftops like unfinished thoughts. Rose's phone screen still glowed in her hand. Congratulations. Phase 1 complete. Amanda was in the elevator. So who was A? Across the room, near the marble bar, stood a man in a charcoal suit. Early 40s. Calm posture. The kind of stillness that doesn't seek attention, but commands it. He lifted his glass slightly. A silent acknowledgement. Rose's pulse didn't spike. It sharpened. Daniel noticed her shift. You know him? No, she said quietly. But he knows me. The man set his drink down and walked toward her. Not rushed. Not dramatic. Measured. Rose Carter, he said warmly, extending his hand. Finally. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried weight. I'm Adrian Vale. The name hit her like a delayed echo. Vale. Carter and Vale Strategic Advisory. The consultancy name she created. She chose Vale randomly. Or so she thought. Daniel glanced between them. You two know each other? Rose didn't break eye contact with Adrian. No, she said carefully. We don't. Adrian smiled slightly. Not personally. There it was again. Not personally. A layer beneath the sentence. 9 months earlier. Brooklyn apartment. 2:03 a.m. Rose sat staring at her laptop screen, setting up her business registration. Business name, Carter and Vale Strategic Advisory. Why Vale? She'd been half asleep, scrolling through a list of surnames. It sounded sharp, balanced, neutral. Carter and Vale. It felt real. She never researched it, never thought twice. Until now. Daniel crossed his arms. Adrian, I wasn't aware you were flying in. Adrian. Daniel knew him. That wasn't good. I didn't announce it, Adrian replied smoothly. I wanted to observe. Observe what? Rose asked. Adrian's eyes flicked briefly toward the elevator where Amanda had disappeared. Phase 1. Rose's stomach tightened. You sent that message. Yes. How do you have my number? Adrian's smile widened, almost impressed. You're careful, Rose. Burner emails. Private hosting. Offshore registration. But you're not invisible. Daniel stepped in slightly. Adrian is one of Verexon's founding investors. The air shifted. Investor. Not just executive. Power behind the power. Adrian nodded. 23% stake. Rose felt something cold settle in her chest. She had built her consultancy in the shadows. But someone had been watching. Let's stop dancing, Rose said evenly. What is phase 1? Adrian tilted his head. Amanda. Rose blinked. What? You leaving Brightline wasn't random, Adrian continued. You were pushed. Yes. And pressure reveals potential. Rose's jaw tightened. Get to the point. Adrian's tone softened slightly. We've been studying mid-level strategic talent across major U.S. markets. New York, Chicago, Austin, San Francisco. We look for people who perform without applause. Daniel added quietly, Rose, Verexon's expansion isn't just about technology. It's about leadership models. Adrian nodded. Phase 1 was to see how you respond to betrayal. Rose stared at him. You orchestrated Amanda stealing my pitch? No, Adrian said calmly. Amanda orchestrated that herself. We simply didn't interfere. The words hit harder than if he had admitted it. You let it happen. Yes. Why? Because resilience is more valuable than brilliance. The city lights blurred for a second. Rose steadied herself. So this entire thing, tonight the acquisition, is real, Daniel said firmly. But it's also an evaluation. Adrian stepped closer. Brightline isn't the prize. Rose's eyes narrowed. Then what is? Adrian's answer was quiet. You. The remaining party guests were whispering in corners. The CEO of Brightline looked pale. Snow had started falling again outside. Adrian continued. We are restructuring Virexen's national branding division. Not just marketing. Strategic control. We need someone who understands corporate politics, but isn't corrupted by it. Rose's heart pounded, but not from excitement. From clarity. You manipulated the environment to test me. Yes. You watched me get humiliated. Yes. You let her try to destroy my credibility. Yes. And you call that leadership development? Adrian didn't flinch. I call it reality. Daniel's voice was more human. Rose, I didn't know the full extent of Adrian's methods. But your results speak for themselves. Rose looked at Daniel, then back at Adrian. And phase 2? She asked quietly. Adrian smiled. Acceptance. Rose stepped away from them, toward the window. Times Square pulsed below like a living circuit board. She thought about the nights in Brooklyn, the loneliness, the discipline, the humiliation, the silent grind. She had built Carter and Vale alone, not as part of some billionaire's psychological experiment. Her phone vibrated again. Another message. Private number. You're not the only one being evaluated. Her breath caught. She turned slowly. Adrian's phone was in his pocket. Daniel's hands were empty. Then she noticed something. Across the room. Jake, her old co-worker, holding his phone, watching her. Their eyes locked. Jake looked terrified. Rose walked toward him. Who are you texting? She asked quietly. Jake swallowed. I don't know what you're talking about. Show me. He hesitated. That was enough. Daniel's security moved in subtly. Jake panicked. This wasn't supposed to go this far, he blurted. Adrian's expression darkened slightly. Explain, Rose demanded. Jake looked between them. Then he said the words that fractured the room. There's another buyer. Silence. What? Daniel said sharply. Jake's voice shook. A private equity group out of Chicago. They've been planning a hostile takeover of Virexen for months. Amanda was feeding them internal insights. Rose felt the pieces rearranging. Amanda wasn't just ambitious. She was connected. Jake continued. They knew you were advising Virexen anonymously. They wanted your strategy before acquisition. Adrian's calm cracked for the first time. How much did they get? He asked coldly. Not much, Jake said quickly. Rose encrypted everything. But they were trying to pull her into Brightline's collapse so they could discredit Virexen's new campaign before launch. Rose turned slowly toward Adrian. You weren't just evaluating me, she said. You were protecting the company. Adrian didn't answer, which was answer enough. Snow fell harder now. Manhattan felt like a chessboard. Amanda wasn't just jealous. She was a piece. And Rose, she was never just a strategist. She was leverage. Daniel's voice cut through the tension. Who's behind the private equity group? Jake hesitated again, then whispered. Avery Cole. The name hit Adrian differently. Rose noticed. Avery Cole? Daniel repeated. Adrian exhaled slowly. My former partner. The room shifted again. This wasn't corporate competition. This was personal. Rose looked between them. So let me understand this correctly, she said evenly. There's a billionaire investor testing my resilience, a rival firm attempting corporate sabotage, and a hostile takeover in motion. Adrian's jaw tightened. Yes. Rose folded her arms. And you thought inviting me to a Manhattan party was phase 1? Adrian's voice lowered. No, Rose. He met her eyes fully. Phase 1 was survival. The elevator dinged again. Everyone turned. But it wasn't Amanda. It was a courier, holding a sealed envelope. Delivery for Ms. Rose Carter. Her heart slowed. She took the envelope. No return address. She opened it carefully. Inside, a printed photograph. Her Brooklyn apartment, taken from across the street, dated yesterday, and beneath it, a single handwritten sentence. Phase 3 begins when you say yes. Rose looked up slowly. Snow falling. City watching. Enemies moving. Adrian studying her. Daniel waiting. And somewhere in Chicago, Avery Cole smiling. Rose folded the photo calmly. Then she said the one thing no one expected. I don't say yes under pressure. She looked directly at Adrian. I design the pressure. Adrian's eyes flickered with something new. Respect. Or fear. Then design it, he said quietly. Rose slipped the photograph into her coat pocket. Because now, it wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about humiliation. It wasn't even about acquisition. It was about war. And Rose had just realized. She wasn't being recruited. She was being positioned. The wind off the Hudson cut through Manhattan like a warning. It was 1:17 a.m. The party had ended, but the real game had just begun. Rose stood alone on the rooftop terrace after everyone else filtered downstairs. Snow swirled under the floodlights. Traffic hummed far below. New York never truly slept, but tonight, it felt like it was watching. She pulled the photograph from her coat pocket again. Her apartment. Her sanctuary. Someone had been outside. Watching. Not randomly. Strategically. Behind her, the terrace door slid open. Adrian stepped out, no coat, unfazed by the cold. You didn't panic, he observed. Rose didn't turn. Panic is loud. I prefer quiet. He studied her profile. Avery won't stay quiet. Good, she replied. Neither will I. Snow collected on the railing between them. Adrian spoke carefully. You need to understand something. Avery Cole doesn't compete for money. He competes for dominance. If he believes you're the keystone in Verexen's expansion, he'll target you first. Rose finally turned to face him. Then he just made a mistake. Adrian raised an eyebrow. How so? Because I grew up underestimated. Rose didn't come from Manhattan penthouses. She grew up in a small apartment in Queens, daughter of a subway conductor and a public school teacher. Winters meant radiator heat and secondhand coats. Summers meant rooftop sunsets and neighbors who knew your name. She learned early. If you don't have power, you build leverage. When her father lost his job during a transit restructuring, she watched her mother negotiate bills like corporate contracts. Calm. Precise. Never emotional. Pressure wasn't new to Rose. It was familiar. And familiarity breeds strategy. I'm not your test anymore, Rose said evenly. I'm your partner, or I walk. Adrian's eyes sharpened. Daniel stepped onto the terrace now, coat wrapped tightly. Rose, he said gently. We didn't anticipate the Chicago move escalating this quickly. But you suspected it, she replied. Daniel didn't deny it. Rose nodded slowly. Good. Then here's what happens next. Both men waited. Snow thickened around them like static. First, she said, bright line acquisition proceeds, but under my terms. Adrian crossed his arms. Which are? Amanda is publicly terminated for misconduct. Not quietly. Publicly. Daniel nodded slowly. That's manageable. Second, Rose continued, Carter and Vale remains independent. Verexen becomes our anchor client, but I retain ownership. Adrian studied her. Bold. Necessary. And third, Daniel asked. Rose looked directly at Adrian. You give me access to everything Avery has touched. Silence. Adrian's jaw tightened slightly. That's confidential. So is my loyalty. The wind howled between buildings. Adrian held her gaze for a long moment. Then he said quietly, Done. In a glass office overlooking Lake Michigan, Avery Cole stood barefoot on polished concrete floors. City lights reflected in the windows like a grid of opportunity. He held a phone to his ear. She didn't fold, he asked. A pause. Then a smirk. Good. He ended the call and walked to a wall-sized screen displaying Verexon stock projections. They think this is about acquisition, he muttered. It's about control. On his desk sat a file labeled Carter, Rose Behavioral Analysis. He flipped it open. Photographs. Timeline charts. Psychological notes. She designs pressure, he whispered. Let's see how she handles isolation. He picked up his phone again. Moved to phase 3. Gray skies hung low over Wall Street. Rose walked through lower Manhattan, boots striking pavement with quiet certainty. Coffee carts steamed on corners. Suited bankers rushed past like clockwork. Her phone buzzed repeatedly. Unknown numbers. She ignored them. She entered a private conference room inside a financial advisory firm Daniel had arranged. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the East River. Adrian was already there. On the table, files, emails, wire transfers, evidence. Avery's firm has been shorting Verexon stock for 6 weeks, Adrian said. Rose scanned quickly. He's trying to weaken you before takeover. Yes. She flipped another page, then paused. Her eyes hardened. What? Daniel asked. Rose turned the page toward them. An internal leak. Time-stamped. From within Verexon's executive division. Adrian's expression shifted. That's impossible. No, Rose said quietly. It's inevitable. She pointed to the digital signature. Someone close to you is feeding him real-time data. The room chilled. Adrian's voice lowered. Who? Rose met his eyes. Not who. A beat. Which one? That afternoon, Verexon's stock dipped sharply. Financial news outlets began speculating about internal instability. Brightline's CEO called Daniel in a panic. Amanda's termination letter leaked online before it was officially announced. And then, Rose's consultancy website crashed. Completely wiped. Server corrupted. Daniel looked at her across the conference table. Avery. Rose nodded. He's isolating me. Discrediting assets. Destabilizing perception. Adrian leaned forward. Do you want security detail? Rose shook her head. No. Both men looked confused. Why? Daniel asked. Rose's voice was calm. Because he wants me to react defensively. She closed the laptop slowly. I'm going to do the opposite. That evening, as Manhattan lights flickered on, Rose did something no one expected. She went public. For the first time ever. On LinkedIn. On industry forums. On financial news networks. A single announcement. Carter and Vail Strategic Advisory. Now leading Verexon national brand integration. No drama. No mention of conflict. Just clarity. Within hours, industry analysts began discussing her track record. Her past campaign performance metrics. Her silent client successes. The narrative shifted. Avery wasn't attacking an unknown consultant anymore. He was targeting a rising strategic leader. And Wall Street noticed. Verexon stock stabilized. Adrian looked at her late that night in Daniel's Midtown office. You just made yourself visible. Yes. That makes you vulnerable. Rose met his gaze steadily. No. A pause. It makes me undeniable. At 11:52 p.m., Rose returned to her Brooklyn apartment. The hallway lights flickered faintly. She unlocked her door. Paused. Something was off. The air felt disturbed. She stepped inside slowly. Nothing stolen. Nothing broken. But on her kitchen counter. Another envelope. This time already opened. Inside. A simple note. You're impressive. But you're still alone. Rose's jaw tightened. Then her phone rang. Unknown number. She answered. Silence at first. Then a smooth voice. Good evening, Rose. Her grip tightened. Avery. He chuckled softly. I was wondering when we'd speak directly. You broke into my apartment. Relax. I prefer the term demonstration. Her voice stayed level. You're escalating emotionally. And you're escalating publicly, he replied calmly. Which means you care. A pause. You want something, Rose said. Yes. What? You. Silence. I don't recruit talent, Avery continued. I acquire it. I'm not for sale. No, he said softly. But you are alone. The words lingered, because they weren't entirely wrong. Before she could respond, the line disconnected. Rose stood still in her quiet apartment. Snow tapped lightly against the window. Alone. Was she? Her phone buzzed again. A text. From Daniel. Emergency board meeting tomorrow. Internal breach confirmed. And beneath it, from Adrian. Trust no one. Rose stared at the two messages. Trust no one. The leak was inside Virexen. Close to Adrian. Close to Daniel. And if Avery was confident enough to break into her apartment, he had access. Deep access. Rose slowly walked to her desk. Opened a hidden drawer. Inside, a second phone. Unregistered. Untouched. She powered it on. Then dialed a number she hadn't used in years. The person on the other end answered immediately. I was wondering when you'd call, the voice said. Rose's eyes hardened. I need Chicago. The voice responded calmly. Then it's time you come home. Rose closed her eyes briefly. Home. Not Queens. Not Manhattan. Chicago. The one city she never talked about. The one chapter she buried. Because Avery Cole wasn't just a rival investor. He was part of her past. And phase 3 was personal. Chicago in February wasn't gentle. It was sharp wind off Lake Michigan, steel gray skies, and streets that remembered everything. Rose stepped out of O'Hare International Airport just after sunrise. The cold hit differently here, heavier than New York, less theatrical. Downtown Manhattan glittered. Chicago watched. She hadn't been back in 8 years. Not since the night everything burned. Her boots pressed into thin snow as she slid into the back of a black SUV waiting at the curb. The driver didn't ask questions. He just said, South Loop? Yes. As the skyline came into view, the Willis Tower cutting through low clouds, Rose felt something unfamiliar. Not fear. Memory. Before New York. Before Bright Line. Before Carter and Vale. There was Chicago. At 22, Rose interned at a private equity analytics firm during her final year at Northwestern. She wasn't the loudest intern. She was the most observant. That's where she met Avery Cole. Back then, he wasn't the polished billionaire investor dominating tech acquisitions. He was charismatic, magnetic, visionary, and dangerous. He had taken interest in her early. You see patterns faster than my analysts, he told her once, watching her restructure a failing portfolio model. She thought it was mentorship. It wasn't. It was recruitment. Avery believed in building loyalty before contracts. He mentored selectively, invested emotionally, then positioned strategically. And Rose, young, ambitious, grateful, almost joined him permanently. Almost. Until she discovered something she wasn't supposed to see. Late one night in the Chicago office, she had stayed behind running comparative risk models on a pending acquisition. Numbers weren't aligning. Projected layoffs were being concealed in shell projections. Retirement funds of small regional companies were being leveraged without disclosure. It wasn't just aggressive investing. It was predatory. She confronted him privately. You're going to wipe out thousands of employees. Avery didn't deny it. Markets don't reward weakness, Rose. They reward ethics. He smiled then. Ethics are branding. That was the moment she understood him. Not evil. Worse. Efficient. She resigned 2 days later. And never spoke to him again. Until now. The SUV stopped outside a converted brick warehouse overlooking the Chicago River. Rose stepped inside. The space was minimalist. Glass offices. Industrial lighting. Waiting in the center was a woman in her early 30s, sharp blazer, sharper eyes. Still dramatic, the woman said. Rose allowed a small smile. Hi, Elena. Elena Martinez had been her closest friend during those Chicago days. Brilliant data engineer. Fearless. The only person who had known why Rose left. You look tired, Elena said bluntly. You look rich, Rose replied. Elena smirked. I am. They hugged quickly, no sentimentality. I saw the news, Elena said. You poked the dragon. He poked first. Elena gestured toward a conference table filled with monitors. You asked for Chicago. You got it. Screens lit up with financial flows, shell companies, acquisition patterns. A web. And at the center, Avery Cole's firm. He's over-leveraged, Elena said calmly, tapping a keyboard. 3 major tech acquisitions in 12 months. High debt exposure masked by short-term liquidity. Rose leaned forward. He's betting on Verexen collapsing before his loans mature. Yes. And if Verexen stabilizes? Elena's lips curved slightly. He collapses. Rose exhaled slowly. So that was it. This wasn't about ego. It was survival for him, which made him desperate. And the leak? Rose asked. Elena pulled up encrypted communications. Inside Verexen's board. Rose's eyes sharpened. Who? Elena turned the monitor. Name displayed. Daniel Hayes. Rose froze. That's impossible. Elena didn't blink. Financial transfers don't lie. Wire confirmations. Offshore accounts. Timestamped communications with Avery's legal team. Daniel wasn't the leak. He was the bridge. Rose felt the air thin. Daniel had seemed genuine. Measured. Supportive. But support can be strategic. Adrian doesn't know, Elena added quietly. No, Rose whispered. If this surfaces publicly, Verexen implodes instantly. Rose stepped back. Processing. Daniel invited her in. Daniel vouched for her. Daniel supported public visibility. He positioned her as the face. If Verexen collapsed, she'd be blamed. Avery isolates. Daniel executes. Adrian absorbs damage. And Rose becomes expendable. She almost laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was elegant. You're in the middle of a corporate divorce, Elena said. No, Rose replied quietly. I'm in the middle of a corporate execution. Rose stepped aside and dialed Adrian directly. He answered immediately. Tell me you found something. I did, she said calmly. A pause. Anne, the leak isn't below you. Silence. It's beside you. Another pause. Be precise, Rose. She inhaled. It's Daniel. The line went completely still. That's not possible, Adrian said quietly. It is. She forwarded the documents Elena had compiled. Adrian didn't speak for a full 30 seconds. When he did, his voice had changed. Colder. If this is true, it is. Then he's been positioning you as collateral. Yes. Avery's words echoed in her mind. You're still alone. No, not alone. Just surrounded. Rose turned back to Elena. We need to accelerate. Define accelerate. We exposed Daniel privately to Adrian. Force internal fracture. And Avery? Rose's eyes hardened. We starve him. Elena grinned. Finally, they began working fast. Financial projections were leaked anonymously to market analysts, showing Verexen's resilience and exposing speculative short positions. Rumors of Daniel's pending resignation quietly circulated through executive networks. Avery's stock position began trembling. Chicago markets noticed first, then New York, then Silicon Valley. By nightfall, Avery's firm was forced to inject emergency capital. He was bleeding, and he knew exactly who did it. Rose's phone rang again. Avery. She answered. You went to Chicago, he said evenly. Yes. You always were sentimental. You always were predictable. A faint chuckle. You think exposing Daniel saves you? It destabilizes you. You're still thinking tactically. And you're running out of liquidity. Silence. You could have joined me, he said softly. I almost did, she replied. And I don't work for men who confuse power with control. His voice hardened slightly. You're making this personal. It was personal the night you told me ethics were branding. A pause. Then something unexpected. You were my best analyst, he said quietly. And you were my biggest lesson. The line disconnected. Back in Chicago, Elena looked at Rose carefully. He won't stop. I know. He'll escalate. Rose nodded. Yes. Her phone buzzed again. Not Avery. Not Adrian. Not Daniel. An unknown number. She opened the message. A live video feed. Her Brooklyn apartment. Inside. Lights on. Someone moving in the background. Her blood ran cold. Elena saw her expression shift. What? Rose turned the screen toward her. The camera angle changed, and the figure stepped into frame. Amanda, smiling, and tied to a chair behind her. Daniel, bruised, conscious. Amanda leaned toward the camera. Hi, Rose. Her voice was calm, almost cheerful. You thought I was just phase one? Rose's heartbeat slowed dangerously. Amanda continued. Turns out, I was recruited too. The screen shifted. Avery stepped into frame behind Amanda. Not angry. Not frantic. Calm. Phase 4, he said softly. Loyalty test. The feed cut to black. Snow fell harder outside the warehouse windows. Chicago didn't forget. And neither did Avery. Rose stood still. Then said one sentence. Book me a flight. Elena stared at her. To New York. Rose's eyes were ice. No. To end this. New York was quiet when Rose returned. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that settles over a city before something irreversible happens. It was 3:42 a.m. when her car crossed the Brooklyn Bridge. The skyline shimmered against the East River, cold and indifferent. Manhattan had no idea that inside one apartment, power, betrayal, and ambition were about to collide. Rose didn't rush. She never rushed. Panic wastes oxygen. Strategy conserves it. Elena's voice echoed in her mind from the flight. He wants you emotionally reactive. He won't get it, Rose replied then. Now, standing outside her apartment building, she looked up at the dark windows. The live feed had ended 20 minutes ago. No police. No noise. Avery didn't want chaos. He wanted control. She entered the building calmly. Each step up the stairs echoed softly. 3rd floor. Her door slightly ajar. She pushed it open. The lights were on. Amanda stood near the kitchen counter, arms folded. Gone was the desperate insecurity from the party. In its place, calculated confidence. Daniel sat tied to a dining chair, bruised but alert. And Avery Cole stood near the window, hands in his coat pockets, looking almost peaceful. Right on time, Avery said. Rose stepped inside and closed the door behind her. You broke into my apartment again, she said evenly. Amanda smirked. You should really upgrade your locks. Rose ignored her. Her eyes stayed on Avery. You always preferred dramatic staging, she said. He tilted his head. You always preferred silent dominance. Daniel shifted slightly in the chair. Rose. She cut him off with a look. Not yet. Avery stepped forward slowly. No security? He asked. No. Brave. No, she corrected softly. Prepared. Amanda rolled her eyes. Oh, please. Rose's gaze flicked to her briefly. You were never the strategist, Amanda. You were the messenger. Amanda's jaw tightened. Avery raised a hand slightly, silencing her. Let's simplify this, he said calmly. Daniel and I had an arrangement. He destabilizes Virexin internally. I acquire majority control. He receives compensation and protection. Daniel looked down. Rose's chest tightened, but not from shock. From confirmation. And Amanda? Rose asked. Ambitious, Avery replied. Easy to redirect. Amanda snapped. You left the company. You think you're better than everyone. Rose's voice stayed steady. No, I just refuse to shrink. Silence settled thickly. Snow tapped lightly against the windows. You came alone, Avery said quietly. Which means you think you have leverage. I do. He smiled faintly. Show me. Rose reached into her coat pocket slowly. Amanda tensed, but Rose only pulled out her phone. She placed it gently on the kitchen counter. Screen facing Avery. Live stream. Financial news broadcast. Headline scrolling. Federal investigation launched into private equity manipulation. Sources cite Avery Cole. Avery's expression did not change, but his eyes sharpened. That's noise, he said. Is it? Rose replied. She tapped the screen again. Another headline. Virexin board votes emergency removal of CFO, internal fraud review. Daniel's breathing shifted. Rose finally looked at him. You were careful, she said softly, but not careful enough. Daniel swallowed. You set me up. No, she replied calmly. You positioned yourself. Avery's voice dropped slightly. You think regulators move this fast? Rose met his eyes fully. They do when evidence is delivered with timestamps, wire confirmations, and insider testimony. Avery's jaw flexed almost imperceptibly. You wouldn't. I did. Amanda looked between them, confused. What is she talking about? Rose's voice was ice. I never went to Chicago just for financial models. She stepped closer. Elena works with federal forensic auditors now. Avery didn't move, but the air around him changed. You tried to isolate me, Rose continued. You forgot one thing. What's that? He asked quietly. I don't operate alone. Daniel looked at Avery. You said this was contained. It was, Avery replied coldly. Amanda's voice rose slightly. What's happening? Rose turned to her. You were phase 1, she said gently. Your ego was predictable. Amanda's face reddened. Daniel was phase 2. Financial bridge. Daniel closed his eyes. And phase 3, Rose continued, eyes back on Avery, was intimidation. She glanced around the apartment. You miscalculated phase 4. Avery's voice dropped to almost a whisper. And what's that? Rose stepped closer. Exposure. Sirens echoed faintly in the distance. Not loud. Not dramatic. Just approaching. Avery's eyes flicked briefly toward the window. Daniel stiffened in the chair. Amanda's composure cracked first. What did you do? She demanded. Rose didn't answer her. She looked at Avery. You taught me something in Chicago, she said softly. He watched her carefully. Ethics are branding. A faint, almost reluctant smile touched his lips. And what did you learn? He asked. That branding, she said evenly, can destroy empires. The sirens grew louder. Closer. Amanda stepped backward. You said no police. I didn't call them tonight, Rose replied. A beat. I called them yesterday. Avery's calm finally fractured. Just slightly. You staged this. Yes. You let us come here. Yes. You recorded everything. Yes. The sirens stopped directly outside the building. Heavy footsteps in the hallway. Daniel's voice broke. Avery. Amanda looked panicked now. You said she was alone. Avery looked at Rose one final time. And for the first time, there was no superiority in his eyes. Only recognition. You were never the analyst, he said quietly. Rose's voice didn't waver. I was always the architect. A knock thundered on the door. Federal agents. Open up. Amanda gasped. Daniel sagged in the chair. Avery closed his eyes briefly, then opened them, and smiled faintly. Pressure makes diamonds, he said. Rose nodded. It also reveals cracks. The door burst open. Agents flooded the apartment. Chaos erupted. Amanda shouting. Daniel pleading. Avery silent as cuffs locked around his wrists. Rose stepped back against the wall, watching. Not triumphant. Not emotional. Just steady. As Avery was escorted past her, he paused. You could have ruled with me, he said softly. Rose met his eyes one last time. I'd rather build without you. He gave the smallest nod. Then he was gone. Spring in New York felt different. Warmer. Lighter. Verexon's restructuring was complete. Adrian stepped down quietly amid internal review. Not arrested, but removed. Daniel cooperated with investigators, reduced sentence pending. Amanda vanished from industry headlines entirely. And Carter and Vale? It didn't just survive. It expanded. Rose stood inside a new office overlooking the Hudson. Minimalist. Clean. Sunlight reflecting off water. A team of analysts worked quietly behind glass walls. Not loud. Not political. Not toxic. Built on clarity. Elena joined via video from Chicago. Stock's up 12%, she said casually. Rose smiled faintly. Good. You good? Elena asked. A small pause. Rose looked out at the skyline. Snow long gone. City still standing. Yes, she said. Why? Rose turned back toward the office floor. Because I finally understand something. What? Rose's voice was calm. When they mocked me for having no job, they weren't seeing unemployment. She allowed the smallest smile. They were seeing preparation. Elena laughed softly. Still dramatic. Always, Rose replied. She ended the call and stepped into her conference room. On the wall behind her desk hung a single-framed sentence. Design the pressure. Her phone buzzed once more. Unknown number. She looked at it, considered, then silenced it. Some games were over, and some invitations didn't deserve answers. Rose walked toward the window as the sun dipped over Manhattan. The same city that once laughed at her. Now listening.